You know, ladies and gentlemen, when a major sports team is a favorite going into their playoff run, especially a defending champion like the 77-78 Montreal Canadiens, you're thinking everything is going to go as expected. They're going to play probably a top 8 team to start with, then a top 4 team, then a top 2 team. But this year, Montreal dominated the last couple of seasons. They only lost 10 games in the regular season en route to first in the NHL with a 59-10-11 record in the 77-78 season. But the playoffs never went as expected because they lost the first game of their postseason against a very strong Detroit Red Wings team that had swept the Atlanta Flames 2-0 in their prelims. Now, they lost 1-2 games. Montreal opened the series against Detroit in strong fashion, winning 6-2. As expected, Doug Jarvis gave Montreal a 1-0 lead in the second, but Bill Lockheed, with his third of the postseason, tied it 1-1. But that, made it 2-1 after, of course, Rajon Houle scored his second of the contest. Now, Yvon Cormier followed with his first at 14:39, while Steve Shutt made it 4-1 at 17:31. Now, Dale McCourt scored at 18:56 to make it 4-2. But Cornway is second of the game at 3:25, and Pierre Mondeau, his first of the postseason, led the way to Montreal. Now, what happened really freaky, the second game of the series, nobody saw this coming, and Dale McCourt played a big factor. The Canadiens had staked themselves to an early 1-0 lead by a counter by Larry Robinson at 3:37, but McCourt scored at 18:06 and 19:22 on the power play to help Detroit have a 2-1 lead. Third period was all Detroit. Former Maple Leaf Harold Thompson scored his second in the postseason, and former 22 seconds, and former Montreal Canadiens Dick Libet wrapped up the scoring at 19:22 of the last stanza. Now, they went back to Detroit, and some people thought that at the Olympia maybe Detroit would have most of the momentum, and he did. Libet, with his second of the postseason, scored at 7:54, only to be followed by Shutt's power play counter at 8:38. Libet's second of against Montreal, the third of the postseason, came at 13:48, or leading 2-1 after the second period. But in the third, it was all Montreal. Lemaire at 30 seconds, LaRouche at 3:46, and Cornway, he's fourth of the series at 12:38. Game 4 in Detroit was all Montreal, an 8-0 shutout, one of the biggest defeats in recent Red Wing playoff history. Doug Risebrough and Gainey scored on the shorthand at 13 minutes and 13:24, followed by Guy Lafleur's first of the postseason at 15:51 to make it 3-0 after the first. Now, Lemaire scored a 1:24 of the second to make it 4-0, with Mondeau and then Shutt and then Lafleur scoring before the 11:30 mark. It was 7-0 before the 12-minute mark of the second period. Steve Shutt wrapped up the scoring in the third period at 17:37, and Jim Rutherford wore the tools of ignorance in that contest. Now, game 5, pretty well we knew what was going on, but Rajon Houle, with his second of the postseason at 20 seconds, Vaclav Nedomansky tied it at 9:40, while Lapointe followed at 11:09 to making 2-1 after the first. Detroit, not hoping to give up, got a goal by Dennis Polonich at 6:40, but in the third, a dual counter from the light-scoring Doug Jarvis at 1:37 and 17:36 was the difference for Montreal. Ron Lowe took the loss for Detroit, with Ken Dryden taking taking the win for Montreal. Now, everybody thought they were going to meet the New York Islanders in the second round as the number 3 seed, but it didn't play out, ladies and gentlemen. The Maple Leafs, on a goal by Lenny McDonald, outlasted him 2-1 in overtime in Game 7. So here we are, Montreal against Toronto in a semifinal round, their first playoff series against each other since 1967. Now, Serge Savard, with his first of the postseason, led their way in the 5-3 beating of Toronto in Montreal. Cornway and Lemaire scored in the second period to make it 3-1 after first, with Ronnie Ellis scoring his third of the postseason at 225. Now Turnbull scored the 8:27 to make it 3-2, but in the third, Yvon Cornway and Guy Lafleur scored back-to-back to make it 5-1 Montreal, before the darling of SCTV, Pat Boutet, scored a 14:32 to round out the scoring at 5-3. Ken Dryden only faced 15 shots in the contest, only made 12 saves. Now in Game 2, here's where it got freaky, ladies and gentlemen. Larry Robinson and Guy Lafleur scored in the first period to give Montreal a 2-0 lead. Robinson scored the power play at 4:01 with Lafleur at 6:46. Turnbull made it 2-1 at 5:47, but Lafleur responded at 15:32, again in the power play with his fifth. But with Dan Maloney scoring as well as 8:35, the Lafleur goal broke up a 2-2 tie. Now Palmateer made 23 saves on 26 shots, while Dryden stopped 21. Back in Maple Leaf Gardens, it was all Montreal. Steve Shutt, Rick Chartrand, and Yvon Lambert at 1:34, 13:09, 17 minutes. It was 3-0 for Montreal after the first. Then Lafleur and Lemaire in the second. Ferguson had made it 3-1. George scored his fifth, and Lafleur rounded the scoring 5:08 in the third period, and it was 6-1 Montreal. Now Dryden made 23 saves, while Palmateer saved 33 of 36. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the final game, closely fought. Jacques Lemaire scored his fifth of the postseason at 7:21 to give a 1-0 lead to Montreal. Shutt scored on the power play 2:15, the insurance marker. So Montreal swept the Maple Leafs and in four straight with a 2-0 victory. Palmateer made 27 saves, while Dryden stopped 23. Now the Stanley Cup Finals were a rematch of the Montreal Canadiens series against Boston in 77, but this one, Boston was ready. In the Game 1, Brad Park staked Boston to an early 1-0 lead, but Montreal would have had 2-1 on goals by Lafleur and Lambert, both in the power play, at 4:31 and 9:53. Shutt scored his seventh at 13:54 of the second, while Cornway scored his seventh of the postseason at 3:55 of the third to make it 4-1. Dryden only made 15 saves, while Cheevers turned aside 23. Now, a lot of people felt Boston was going to have a good chance to win Game 2, and Park again opened the scoring at 3:57 of the second, only have Shutt tied up at 7 minutes. Now, Rick Smith tied it for Boston at 15:48, 3 minutes after gaining second in the postseason. And of course, the big overtime counter by Guy Lafleur at 13:09, and a broken play that was a shot from the blue line that Cheevers couldn't handle. Now, Dryden made 30 saves, while Cheevers made 32. Now, ironically twist in Game 3 back in Boston, it was all Boston. They pummeled Dryden for 36 shots, scoring 4 in a 4-0 victory. Gary Doak and Middleton scored in the first at 59 seconds and at 5:11, while Peter McNabb and Terry Rowley at 2:54 and 15:39 wrapped it up for Boston. Cheevers stopped 16 shots for the shutout. Now, Game 4, we call this the Bobby Schwartz game. This goal was shown under 78-79 kind of media guide for the new season. Shepard opened the scoring at 25 seconds to give Boston a 1-0 lead, but Risebrough, his second, at 13:26 made it 1-1. Robinson scored at 7 minutes of the second period to make it 2-1, but counters by McNabb and Park, who was having a great series, put Boston ahead 3-2, while Lafleur tied it up his 10th of the postseason with 33 seconds left, and it was followed, of course, by the overtime heroics by Bobby Schwartz at 6:22. Now, in the final, ladies and gentlemen, Robinson in Game 5, Robinson and Mondeau scored for the victors. Mondeau had the game winner at 11:10 on the power play. LaRouche and Lemaire scored in the second to make it 4-0, while Marcotte replied for Boston at to make it 4-1 at 11:22 in the final period. Now, in the final game, again, Brad Park, great series, he's 9th in the postseason, scored at 4:05, but Steve Shutt tied it at 7:01, and then Murray Trombley's first two of the postseason at 9:20 and 13:37 made it 3-1, and then Rajon Houle, his line mate, scored at 17:46. There was no scoring in the third period. and Dryden only stopped 15 of 16 shots, while Cheevers turned aside 20 of 24. Now, the idea about this, ladies and gentlemen, a lot of people felt, and Larry Robinson was consummate winner this, of course, a lot of people felt that Brad Park, if Boston would have taken a series of 7 games, might have been MVP, was that good in the postseason. I know there were some considerations. But the Montreal Canadiens squad, ladies and gentlemen, in that year had a good mixture of players, up-and-coming players and veterans, almost like the 71 champions of that year. So just to recount that year, ladies and gentlemen, to make sure everybody's covered, Montreal's team that year had a plethora of, talent. And here we go, because a lot of people, a lot of names of Hall of Famers and top players: Pierre Bouchard, Rick Chartrand, Yvon Cornway, Ken Dryden, Brian England, Bob Gainey, Rajan Hull, Pat Hughes, Doug Jarvis, Guy Lafleur, Yvon Lambert, Guy Lapointe, Michel Larocque, Pierre LaRouche, Jacques Lemaire, Gilles Lepierre, Pete Mahovlich, Pierre Mondou, Bill Nyrup, a young Mike Polish, Doug Risebrough, Larry Robinson, Savard, Rod Schutt, Steve Schutt, Mario Tremblay, and Murray Wilson. Ironically, this was, and pretty well an all-Canadian team. They had one player from Venezuela, which was Chartrand, of course. Nyrup and Polish were there. Now in the playoffs, Lafleur had 21 points, tying with Larry Robinson. Robinson had 17 assists, and again, a strange defensive core, because we had Robinson, Savard, Lapointe, Billy Nyrup, Chartrand, Bouchard, and England. So we had multiple defensemen. Very rarely that Montreal would use so many defensemen in the postseason. They use 7. And Ken Dryden started all games for Montreal, 918 minutes total for the postseason. And I think the big factor for a lot of people is that Pierre LaRouche's 2 goals, he only played 5 games, was a big factor. He's paid to score, and that's what he did in the postseason. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's the story of the very different way that the Montreal Canadiens won the 78th Stanley Cup. And again, that Game 2 loss to Detroit freaked a lot of people out, because they said, oh, well, if they're beatable by Detroit. Detroit had a good team that year. If I'm not mistaken, he had, Paul Woods and a lot of, Dale McCourt was a strong young player. So thanks for listening, and if you like what we're doing here, give us a like, comment, subscribe, or share. Bye.